Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's basic Hebrew lesson for the Bible study Hickory on this 22nd day of January 2023. And I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit on us. We're going to take a look at Hebrew numbers, and then we're going to get into a couple of texts to show how these numbers can be significant. So, first of all, as you may remember, there are two different types of numbers, one being cardinal numbers and another one being ordinal numbers. And so, what these two different types of numbers do, you have, of course, as we said, the cardinal numbers, and then as well the ordinal numbers. These cardinal numbers, this is like 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So these are going to be the counting numbers. And then we also have the ordinal numbers, which would be, of course, first, second, third, and so forth. And these are numbers that tell us some sort of an order of things. And so the way that I like to remember the distinction between the two, ordinal, and you can see that ORD right at the front there, are numbers that give order, ORD. So there is that connection there between those words. And then cardinal numbers are counting numbers. They both begin with C. And so that just helps me to remember what it is that we're dealing with. So cardinal, counting numbers, ordinal, order numbers. And so these different numbers here, as you can see as we go on through this, and let me just make that a tad bigger. So you can see that these numbers that we're dealing with, they are usually used, well, they are not infrequently used with nouns. And as such, they're going to modify nouns, and thus they're going to agree with the nouns that they modify in terms of gender. And it is for this reason that you have at the top here these little headers that say with the masculine and with the feminine nouns. So if you have then a number that is referring to an entity that would be masculine grammatically or feminine grammatically, there's going to be a specific form of the number that applies. These numbers, not only can they be used adjectively in that way to modify a noun, like for instance, if we said two trucks and thus two modifying trucks, but also we can also have these numbers being used as nouns, as substantives. And for this reason, these numbers can be in either the absolute or the construct state as well. And so that's why those particular headers are there. So that just that explains the headers. So taking a look at the cardinal numbers here. So 1, and we're looking at the forms that these numbers take when they're modifying a masculine noun. So 1 would be echad, 2, shenayim, 3, shelosha, 4, arba'a, 5, chamisha, 6, shisha, 7, shiv'a, 8, shemona, 9, tisha, and 10, asara. And so those are going to be the numbers. Now, as I went through those numbers, you probably noticed that there was a little bit of a switch. Number 1, ehad, does not have an "a" ending, just like what we would expect for an adjective that is modifying a masculine noun. Then you come on down here to number 2, and you can see shenayim, which has that ayim ending, which we would anticipate on a dual, and that fits here, dual 2, which is exactly what we see. But then we come on down to 3, and you can see shalosha. And all of a sudden, we have an ah ending, which is what we would anticipate if we were dealing with an adjective that were modifying a feminine noun. The numerals are a little bit different in that while numbers 1 and 2 are going to take the masculine form when they are referring back to a masculine noun, numbers 3 through 10, however, are going to take the feminine form. So there is that little bit of a difference in that respect. And so, in essence, once you hit the number 3, those genders flip. They seem to have done that for to provide some sort of a distinction. The same thing as well applies when we come over to the feminine. Notice this. So, thus, number 1, when it's referring back to a feminine noun, is achath. And you can see what it is that they've done there. They've taken this triliteral root, echad, and they've added that feminine ath ending to it. So they've taken it and made it feminine. It fits. And then here you can see instead of shanayim, we have shatayim. And so thus again, it has that dual ending, and the tau lets me know that it is feminine. So it all fits. But then as soon as we come down to the numeral 3, notice what we have here. We have shalosh. Now, we would have anticipated if this is referring back to a feminine noun that it would have the ah ending, but it does not. This is, in fact, the masculine form, the unmarked form. And same thing as we go down through here. Arba, chamesh, sheish. It's kind of interesting. You can actually hear where we get our word 6 from that. Sheish. Sheva, you can hear where we get our word 7 from that. Shemone, tesha, eser. So none of these from 3 down have that ah ending. So again, for these numbers, that gender has switched. So up here, we have a feminine number modifying a feminine noun, but down here, it's going to be a masculine number modifying a feminine noun. So they've switched those numbers there just to make some sort of a distinction. But those are going to be the numbers. So you can see again, we have echad, shenayim, shelosha, arba'a, chamisha, shisha, shiv'a, shimona, tisha, and asara. And so those are going to be the numbers. Now, it's kind of an interesting thing once we get into the numbers that are greater than 10. In essence, what they're going to do, they're going to take the number 10 and then they're going to put the singles digit with it. So thus, you can see here for 11, we have ahav, asar. So we have 1 and 10, with ahad being 1, asar being 10. So it's like we're saying 110. So that's 11. And then you can come on down here to 12 and notice shanem, asar. Well, shanem is 2, asar is 10. So 210, 12. Then you come on down here to 13, shalosha, asar, 3, 10, 13. And then you have arba'a, asar, 4, 10, 14. And so it basically, and it'll go that same way all the way down through 19. And so that then is the way that they built those numbers when they spelled them out in this way. And then over here, you can see these same numbers once we've entered into the tens that are going to be modifying that feminine noun. And so thus we have ahath esrei. Notice it's gone back to that feminine again. So we have ashte esrei. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me come on down here. So that's another way of writing 11. But then you also have here Shatem Esrei, so 210. And then you have Shalosh Esrei, Arba Esrei. So notice again, just like what we saw up above, for 11 and 12, the gender matches. So that idea of feminine and masculine. But then down here, the gender has flipped again. And you can see that there's that ending there. There's the ending, and it's going with a masculine noun. And then down here as well, because notice it's going ahead and modifying that feminine. Now, what is interesting is, as you can see, you do have that feminine all the way down here with the tens and then the masculine all the way down here on the masculine side. So those are going to be the numbers. Now, what about when we get into the other digits? Well, with these 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, in essence, what they do is they go ahead and they take the ones and they make them plural. The primary exception to this being 20, where they've taken the word for 10 and they've pluralized it. So thus 20 would be esrim, so tens, two tens. So 20. Now 30, what they've done is they've taken the word for three, shalosh, and they've made it plural, shaloshim. Same thing for 40, arba'im, 50, hamishim, 60, shishim, 70, shiv'im, 80, shimonim, 90, tish'im. And so that is what we see there. In essence, they take the ones and they add that plural to it. And then how would I form 21, 22, 23? Well, in exactly the same way that I formed the tens here. So it would be like Achad Esrim, there would be 21 and so forth. And so those are going to be those numbers. Now, we also, as I said, we do have what we call the ordinal numbers. These are the numbers that give that order idea. And so notice here, in essence, what they've done, and we'll see this as we go through, they've taken the names of the numbers and they've added an E to them. The exception being the first one here, Rishon, which takes that idea of head, Rosh, and thus makes it the first in the sequence. So this would be the head of the sequence, if you will. So Rishon, first. If it's modifying a feminine noun, then we would have Rishonah. Second, Sheni. And remember that we saw up above that 2 was Shanayim. So they've taken the triliteral root and they've just added that E to the end. So Sheni, and then on a feminine noun, we would say Sheni. Third, Shilishi, 4 for the feminine, Shilishith. Fourth, Rivi'i or Rivi'ith. Fifth, Kamishi, Kamishith. Sixth, Shishi, Shishith. Seventh, Shivi'i, Shivi'ith. Eighth, Shivini or Shivinith. Ninth, Tishi'i or Tishi'ith. 10th, Asiri or Asiri. And so basically you can see what has happened there. They've taken the root of the numbers for the counting numbers that we saw up above, the cardinal numbers, and they've added that Hickory yod ending to it. So those are basically the ordinals and the cardinals. Now, why is this significant? Well, this does come into play, for example, when we take a look back at Genesis chapter 1. And we had kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm also going to take us into Genesis 11, and numbers come into play there as well. So notice here as we go through Genesis chapter 1, we have in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And then we have the closing here where he goes ahead and says in the KJV, the first day. Now, the interesting thing is, first in English would be an ordinal number. Now, let's come on down, verse 9 here. Or, yeah. So, verse 8, and we have the second day, and this is another ordinal number. And then you come on down a little bit further, and you can see as well that we do have third day here as well, another ordinal number, and then as well, fourth day, well, that would be another number that is giving us order. And then you come on down here a little bit further, and we have fifth day, ordinal. And then you can come on down here, and then sixth day, ordinal. So in the English text, all of those days are ordinal. But let's take a look at the Hebrew text. So, and you can see this right here. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom, V'lachoshek kara laila, Vayihi erev, so then existed evening. Vayihi voker, then existed morning. Yom echad. Well, we saw echad. Now, we would think if this were an ordinal number, we should see a rishon, but that's not what we see here. What we see here is actually this number here, echad. So this then is actually going to be a cardinal number. That is, it is that counting number. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Well, let's come back down here, verse 8. Vayihi erev, then existed evening. Vayihi voker, then existed morning. Yom sheni. Well, now wait a minute here. So day 2, so I would have expected shenayim, but that's not what we have here. We have sheni, which is right here, second. So we have an ordinal number here. So all of a sudden we've switched to an ordinal number. Okay. Well, let's come on down a little bit further and see what it is that we have. Vayihi erev, then existed evening. Vayihi boker, then existed morning. Yom shlishi. Uh-oh. Do you see that Hickory ending again? That lets me know we're dealing with the ordinal number third here. And then if we come on down a little bit further as well, notice here, Vayihi erev, Vayihi voker, Yom Ruvi'i. There's our number again. But notice that Hickory ending? Another ordinal number, the ordinal number for fourth. And then if we come on down just a little bit further, verse 23, Vayihi erev, then existed evening. Vayihi voker, then existed morning. Yom Hamishi. There it is. There's our number. And you can see the Hirokyo ending. Another ordinal idea, fifth. And then if we come on down here to the end of chapter 1, notice here, Waihi Erev, then existed evening, Waihi Voker, then existed morning, Yom Hashishi. And there is our number again, and it has the Hirokyo, another ordinal. So, in other words, what we had here in this particular instance, verses 1 through 5 are said by God to be day 1. But then following that, we have second day, third day, fourth day, all the way down to a day, the sixth one. So all of these following day 1 are all ordinal numbers, but the first one is a cardinal. Why? What's going on here? Well, it demonstrates that the Lord had, in his text, set the first day apart in such a way that it was made distinct from the other days. And so that then is the difference. There is this distinction that exists. In other words, this is day 1 is not just a first in a series. This is, by that distinction, indicated to be the very first day of all sequences. And so thus that would indicate then the very first day. Now, why is that significant? Well, I can go ahead and take you back to a translation that has come out here recently. Well, the Tanakh came out in 1985. This is the copyright 1985. But notice here, we would say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. But look at what this translation, English translation, does. It says, when God began to create heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the. I'm sorry, I looked down. So when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And then God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. In other words, what this translation is doing, a first day, instead of saying day 1, they are saying by their translation that they hold to the idea that verses 1 through 5 are just indicative of a re-beginning of creation as opposed to the absolute beginning. And so that does create a little bit of an issue, but that's not what the Lord said. He set apart the first day by using that cardinal number instead of the ordinal. So that's one of those interesting ways in which the numbers can be used. Now, I do want to show you another interesting way in which these numbers can be used. Having finished with having seen that Hish Tefel last week in Genesis 22, we're going to be moving into Genesis chapter 11 here. And so, and this will show a couple of other interesting grammatical constructions. But I do want to take a look at this particular verse here. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech.
You may need to go even larger.
Ah, all right. Very good. Okay. So, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. So, taking a look at that particular verse, and let's come on down here to this. So, this is that verse. Wayihi kol haaretz safa echad udevarim ahadim. So you can see right there as we go through this, Wayihi, you have seen that particular construction before. Wow with the path back followed by a dogish forte. There's our wow consecutive. Here is the imperfect performative, third masculine. No U class of vowels, so I know this is third masculine singular. So we would have then he existed, because that is the verb haya there. Well, what was it that existed? Well, here's our subject right here. Kol haaretz. Kol is going to be the word kol in its construct form. In its absolute form, it would look like this. But we do have that reduced vowel to that kamate satuf there. So this is the construct form and it is masculine, and we would say entirety. So thus we would have as a construct entirety of haaretz, and you can see I have my article on the word eretz here. Just a slight change in pointing under the influence of the addition of the article there. So we have then the earth, and because of the fact that my absolute is definite, that also makes the construct definite. So then the entirety of the earth existed how? Well, this is the description right here, the rest of the verse, of how it is that the earth existed. So safa, this is going to be a feminine word meaning lip. And so you can see lip, and then echath. Well, that's that numeral, that cardinal number 1 that we saw that modifies a feminine noun. And so thus we have then one lip. And then notice here, udevarim ahadim. So you can see the conjunction there. That's the form that the conjunction takes when it precedes a vocal schwa. And you can see devarim. Notice that im ending there, indicating that it is plural. So thus and this is going to be on the word davar, expression. And so we would say, and expressions. And then we have ahadim. And you can see that same word that we had up above there, but in the form that it takes when it's modifying a masculine. But notice here as well, it's plural. So ones. So, and expressions, ones. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. How can something that is singular be plural? And how then did the translators get from there to this idea of expressions ones to one speech? Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. Let's take a quick look here and see if we can find any other place where this particular phrase, this particular word, ahadim, occurs. And as a matter of fact, there are. And so thus I'm going to go ahead and search for that. So we have here our context, Genesis 11:1. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And so thus we have one speech, udevarim achadim. But notice here, Genesis 27:44. And tarry with him a few days until thy brother's fury turn away. And this idea of a few days, do you see the translation right here? Well, the Hebrew that's underlying that translation there. So you can see yamim, achadim. Well, achadim, there's our word, but yamim, this is the plural of the word yom, meaning day. And you can see how it is that they've gotten this idea of a few days. It's as though there's this series of days But because they all have something in common, that is those days where Jacob is going to be sojourning with Laban, they have something in common. And so, thus, they're viewed as one set, if you will. So, a set of days, sort of a collective type idea. And then it's the same type of idea here in Genesis 29:20. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. And so, thus, notice here again, a few days, it's that same idea where we have kukyamim ahadim. So, as days, ones. So, again, a set of days, a very few days, a short period of time, a collective idea. And then Daniel 11:20 as well. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. And notice here as well, here is our phrase right there. So, uviyamim ahadim. So basically, and in days ones. Again, you have a series of days that are being viewed as one, as a collective type idea. And because they're being viewed as that collective type idea, they're being viewed as a few. And so that is kind of what is going on. Basically, the basic idea behind that idea of echadim is that you may have many of something, but they're being viewed collectively. That is, there is something that they have in common, and thus there is some sort of a unity that exists among them. And so, thus, what would be the unity here? And expressions ones. Well, we know that we would have individuals. This, of course, talking about language. So there is thus talking about speech, spoken language, and different people. You see this even across our country, different dialects of English spoken here in the United States, and yet it's all one language. And so there could have been post flood differences in pronunciations, different usages of different words, and yet it's still one language. They were still able to communicate with one another, no difference in language system. And so you could have that. And then also consider as well, people don't just express themselves in language via speech, but also in terms of writing as well. And so, but both of those, speech and writing, go ahead and express the same language, just in perceptibility to different senses, speech to the ears, writing to the eyes. And so that is what is going on. But in other words, it is still the same language system, no difference. And so thus we have here one language, one lip that they are using here right as they're getting ready to go into Babel. All right. Is there anything else that we need to add there, sir?
I was looking for the document where I had laid out those, the ordinal cardinal relationship, but I don't see it immediately in my Genesis text. So it's somewhere in the paper. I'll find it at another time, but that way they can actually see that in a very brief layout. But
Sure.
we'll get there later. So yeah, if you're wanting to stop there, then we can stop, and we'll go for about 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm still bringing up a couple of papers, and I've still got to I got to resave the paper about Mrs. Job and blessing and cursing. So that would be a good one probably to go through today too, since it's related to that. So
Yes. Brother Gilbert and I were talking a little bit about that before class.
Mm-hmm. So do we need to go through the paper, or does everybody know all of that perfectly?
Oh, I think going through it would be a good thing.
Even after we go through it, we won't all know it perfectly, but we'll know better, I think. So, okay. All right.
I'll go ahead and stop the recording then.
All right.
All right.